G'day mates, it's Busta here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a shout out for sponsoring this episode. And you know, a crime is a lot like a puzzle. What I mean is that each connection help reveals the big picture, and it's a bit of a thrill to put it all together. And when I'm not thinking about true crime, my brain still craves a challenge, and that's why I love Best Fiends. But recently too, I introduced a friend of mine to the game, and it's been a lot of fun competing over who was in the lead while social distancing. And I've really enjoyed some of the daily quests as of late, especially the wanted quests where you go out and try to locate certain bosses to get tons of rewards. And honestly, Best Fiends is a great little game that features an array of puzzles with an engaging story, and is just a really good piece of entertainment for casual gameplay. I'm still playing it on my phone at night too when I can't sleep, and I've really enjoyed the fact that I don't have to invest huge amounts of time into the game to see progress and to have some fun. I've also really enjoyed the complexity in the levels as the challenge has ramped up a bit, and one of the better aspects of the game, in my opinion at least, are the boss levels where you have to really strategize for the win. But one of the strategies that I found really helpful is combining explosives to knock out huge amounts of hit points. But one other thing too that I only recently discovered was that you don't actually need to worry about Wi-Fi access or using cell data to play, which I think is pretty sweet. Best Fiends has thousands of levels already, with new levels, events, and characters added every month. It's hours of fun right at your fingertips, and, like I said, you can even play offline. With over 100 million downloads and tons of 5-star reviews, Best Fiends is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. So this was about 4 years ago. I went over to my friend's house for my first sleepover there, ever. And quite honestly, I was dreading it, as I suffer from extreme separation anxiety, so I was already nervous. But it started off normal. My friend and I were basically just chatting all night. Though at about 11:30 at night, we heard the kitchen door open. But we were sleeping in a room connected to the kitchen, so if you were standing in the kitchen, you could see us. In walks my friend's dad, and he stood there to see if we were awake, and like any 12-year-old, we would pretend that we were asleep. Once his dad was sure that we were asleep again, we saw him open the pantry door and step inside, leaving a small gap, just big enough to look out and watch us. Both me and my friend saw this, and after about 15 minutes of dead silence, I whispered to my friend asking what his dad was doing. He said that he wasn't sure and that he'd never done this before. After about 45 minutes of him staying in there, me and my friend started having doubts about what we saw, so I volunteered to go and get myself a drink of water, which I would need to walk past the pantry to do. I got up and I walked past the door and sneakily looked inside as I walked past. And sure enough, he was still standing in there. I went back and told my friend, and we both just lied there in silence until about 10 minutes later, the pantry door opens and he walks out and goes to bed. Me and my friend were really freaked out, but eventually we fell asleep from tiredness. We both remember it though, and I have slept there since, but he's never done the same thing since then. In fact, that has always been really nice. And I guess that this leaves me to wonder, since it was so dark, if it was actually his dad at all. Maybe it was somebody else. So if you don't know what a workaway is, it's basically an organization that enables people to volunteer abroad to help others in need in exchange for food and shelter. Most often than not, people on Workaway decide to help others abroad to travel to exotic places. The people that hire Workaway volunteers are often families, couples, or elderly people that are too busy for basic chores and therefore decide to shelter Workaway volunteers to take care of these basic things. This means that complete strangers, aka the Workaway volunteer and the host or hosts, will be living together for an extended period of time. And this is where things can go south. So for context, I'm 18 and this happened to me just a couple of months ago. It was my first time doing a workaway, and after the 2 days of just trying it out, I'm 100% sure that I don't want to ever do it again. It was one of the most traumatizing events of my life, in fact, that I'll remember till the day that I die. Also, I'm a female, and for context's sake, I've always received compliments on my body ever since I hit puberty, so I'd say that I'm definitely on the attractive side. I'm not trying to big note myself, but it just is what it is. Not to say, too, that it's always been rainbows and sunshines for me on an emotional level. But anyway, one day while browsing on Workaway, I received a direct message from an offer of an elderly couple that needed help with gardening chores. The account that messaged me had its first name set as Enzo, so I assumed it was the husband that was hiring the Workaway volunteers. Upon inspecting his profile picture, though, I realized that it was a selfie of him with a much younger woman, maybe in her early 20s if I had to guess. She wasn't even smiling and didn't look like she was even acknowledging that she was in the guy's selfie. I don't think too much of it, though, and I then read their description. Couple looking for some gardening help, very beautiful view on the ocean, looking for young and strong workaways for help. Don't forget that swimsuit. There was also a winking, smiling face at the end, which made it a little creepy, but I probably thought the guy was old and just trying to be funny. They had pictures of the house that seemed like a charming one with a pool and a nice view on the beach. It looked like paradise, and it had a pretty good rating, so in the end I accepted. All of it was in South Italy too, and looked to be, overall, a really nice place to stay. And all in all, I was actually pretty excited. But fast forward, and I arrive at the place. It's kind of like in the pictures, except that the garden totally is run down, as if someone had actually destroyed it. Anyway, I get introduced to Enzo first. He's poorly dressed, and I immediately notice that he's a little socially awkward, but I think that that's just because he can barely express himself in English. I ask him where his wife is, to which he responds that she actually died about a week ago because of cancer. On the spot, I am immediately heartbroken, and I give him my condolences, though I'm a little skeptical because you don't just die of cancer in your 20s. Maybe they broke up and he just didn't want to admit it. I don't know, but he seemed like he was lying about something. And as I'm saying I'm really sorry for his loss, he looks down as if he was crying. So I sort of awkwardly, not really out of sympathy, decide to give him a hug. While we're hugging, though, I notice that his hands are a little low down my back, barely touching my butt. I was wearing a sundress, so I really felt it, but I didn't think too much of it again and just sort of brushed it off because it was old and rather short. But this behavior didn't go unnoticed, and it was definitely the first red flag for me. When we go inside and he starts showing me around the house, he keeps telling me that there's a pool in the garden if I want to swim. And he tells me this about 3 times. It's getting on my nerves, in fact. He shows me my room, and it's a big room with a view on the backyard pool and the beach and whatnot. He had showed me his room, which had the same view. And once in my room, though, he also mentions that there's mice in the attic above my room that sometimes make noise at night. I tell him, "Oh, really?" And he just doesn't answer. I sort of awkwardly look out the window, and after a long awkward pause of me looking outside the window and turning back to him to compliment the view, he eventually leaves my room without saying anything. I thought that maybe he didn't hear me, but whatever, I suppose. Fast forward to the next day, and I'm working on the garden, cutting bushes and watering the plants, while he's out on the porch behind me laying down and taking a nap, or I thought so at least. It was a pretty hot day that day, so I was just wearing a bikini and a baggy old shirt on top. While I'm bending over to water some smaller plants in the back, I can't help but notice, though, that his eyes are open, looking right at me. I'm not that sure that he's watching me, though, so I decide to go to water the plants next to him and pretend that I think that he's sleeping. I bend over and pretend that I'm picking up something from the soil. I'm aware that my breasts are more or less left exposed through the baggy shirt that I was wearing. I quickly glance in his direction and see that his old eyes are wide open, and locked directly onto my breasts. A little disgusted now, I stand up and walk towards the side of the house where he can't see me. A couple of moments after that, he goes back inside, and I start to get a little suspicious about this guy, but I couldn't really blame him. I mean, after all, his wife was allegedly dead, or broken up. It wasn't the first time that a guy had looked at me like that. But I take this as a second red flag, though. On the second day, Enzo had given me permission to take the day off, so I decided to wander off to the beach. It was fun too, and especially beautiful, but it was a little too sunny, so I decided to go back into the backyard near the pool and under the shade of the trees. When I come back, Enzo was walking towards me with swimming goggles in his hand, and suddenly tells me that there's small rocks in the pool that I should pick up because he's too old to go that deep in the water. That's when I thought that he was a little odd. Firstly, who has small rocks not so randomly scattered in their pool floor? And second, who owns a pool and doesn't he have a perch to get small leaves and insects out of the water anyway? But put on the spot, I just decided to do the job. I was already in a swimsuit anyway, so why should I not do it? I put on the goggles, go inside the water, and I pick the rocks up. While I'm doing this, he's just sort of standing there, watching me do it. But in the water, I faintly hear the iPhone's recording sound, and while going back up out of the water, after picking up the last rock, I notice him on his iPhone for the first time. He was holding it in the water, with both hands as if he was zooming in on me. It was just too obvious, and I tell him that I'm done and ask him what's on his phone. He replies that he's using it to zoom in the water because it's waterproof, and he can use it to see the rocks in the water. At the time, too, I told him that it was a great idea, though I obviously didn't believe it one bit. This was the third red flag, and right then and there I make up my mind to leave early because I really don't feel safe around this guy. I ask him for a towel, though, since I forgot one, and he quickly jerks away to get one in the house. While I look at the sea in front of me, I wait for a good 5 minutes before he hands me a towel. And that's when I suspected that he was most likely watching me from the upstairs window before actually getting a towel. I dry myself off, and I get to my room to take a nap because, after all of that, I was pretty exhausted. Once in my room, though, I look for a possible hidden camera because I started to doubt Enzo. Fortunately, though, I found nothing, so I locked my door, took a shower, and I went to sleep. I wake up at around 7, and for some reason I can't find Enzo anywhere in the house. It's dinner time, so I just decide to start cooking. I call him out for dinner, and he finally shows up. I ask him where he was, to which he responds that he was in his room. Again, though, this was a complete lie, since I walked past his empty room on several occasions. We had dinner, though, and he kept telling me how good I was. I kept telling him with everything that's left in me that I was flattered, to which he responds back with an old creepy smile. And that night, I had some trouble sleeping. I had obviously locked my door and thus felt safe, but it was just an unusually hot summer night, I think. But before coming here, I had this habit of sleeping naked that I stopped doing once I came here for obvious reasons. I opened the windows to get some fresh air, but that still didn't help. So I ended up subsiding to some old habits and decided to take off my pajamas to sleep naked. I instantly fell asleep after that, but then I awoke at around 3 a.m. to some noises coming from the ceiling. It was sort of like a faint old wood cracking, maybe. I open my eyes and I look at the ceiling above me, and that's when, in the dark, between the planks, I faintly see a set of eyes looking directly at me. I lock eye contact with Enzo, who is in the attic, and get into full panic mode, but I'm paralyzed with fear, so I don't move. I pretend that I'm looking at the left side of the ceiling, and then I close my eyes. My breasts are completely exposed to this creep now, so I decide to turn to my side and move up the blanket to cover up. And for the rest of the night, I'm just too scared to open my eyes or move. So I just stay there, paralyzed in fear, until some sunlight finally reaches me. Morning came, and I was more than ready to just get out of here, and when it was 6 in the morning, I just quickly packed my stuff and left the house running. I waited at the train station to get to the nearest airport, and thank God that I came out unharmed. That guy, whoever he really is, was a twisted and seriously sick pervert. So I've worked at a few nursing homes, but one of them is much more memorable than the rest. I had many encounters there. I'll name a few though. So I was working night shift during all of these, and one time in the middle of the night, a chair alarm on a wheelchair started going off. Now, mind you, it's sitting in the middle of the empty hallway, and when I go to check it out, it's definitely shut off, but it went off a few more times before it finally stopped. Another time was with an elderly lady, and for some reason her call light just kept going off. I asked her if she needed anything, and she repeatedly told me that she was fine. Then I finally asked her why she was pressing her call light, and she told me in Spanish, "It isn't me. I don't even have the button with me. Look, it's over there. These children won't stop pressing it. I've told them to behave. They keep jumping in and out of the window, and they're being very bad." Her call light ended up near the window, and it definitely couldn't have been her too, because she actually had no legs. Needless to say, I was a little freaked out by that one, but I believed her. These elderly people, they can see things, and sometimes they would tell me too that a man in black was walking the halls. Another lady called me in the middle of the night telling me to tell that man in the black to go away and stay out of her room. She was really scared too, and at this facility, we had a hospice room where one would go when they were about to pass away. And one night I was so tired that I decided to take a nap on my break. And well, this room was empty and had a nice recliner, so I decided to use it. I wish I could say that something scary happened, but it didn't. All I got was just this really weird, overwhelming feeling of peace, like everything in the world was okay. I suddenly started to smell flowers as well, and quite honestly, it was the best nap I've ever had. I never felt scared like I was in danger, just sort of accepted that it was haunted. I don't know, it was weird, and when I think back on it, I can't help but remember that smell. So many people had passed away in this facility too, and in this particular room, and it still freaks me out. I remember back in the days of middle school, I had a really creepy neighbor. We lived like 3 minutes away from the high school that I would be attending in the future too. My brother, on the other hand, was already graduated from his high school, and he used to walk there pretty much every day. My brother, on the other hand, was already graduated, and he would be walking there every day. We lived next to his maths teacher at the time, and nothing was weird about him at first. My dad and this neighbor, his name was Rob, said hi to each other pretty much every evening, but that was basically it. My dad and Rob barely spoke to each other, but mainly because my dad is pretty antisocial. I got dropped off by my bus from the middle school that I was attending, and Rob had 2 girls who were in the same grade as I never really spoke to them though, mainly because they always ran home for some weird reason. But I was walking home, minding my own business, just listening to Falling in Reverse, and Rob approaches me. I was right in front of my house when he addressed me by my name. I thought him knowing my name was a bit strange, but I just figured that my dad had told him my name at some point, or my brother mentioned me in class for some reason. Rob asked me if I saw his kids get off the bus, and I told him that I did because they always book it past me off the bus to get home. And right when I told him that, he kept walking closer to me. I was obviously backing away because I got a really weird feeling in my stomach. I was sort of frozen, even though I was right in front of my house. I had no idea what to do, to be honest. Rob then asks if I could help him find his kids because they never came home. I stood my ground though, and I told him that I saw both of his kids go inside the house. Rob then just sort of stares at me intently, and asks why I never talked to him since we live next door to each other. But before I could answer, my dad was standing outside and said, "Get inside now, honey." The neighbor Rob quickly turned away and he went into his house without looking at my dad. I'm not a spiritual person by any means, but my dad, he was supposed to be at work that day. I would have been home alone if he didn't call in because he got sick the night prior. But I still get chills thinking about what might have happened if my dad wasn't home. Another weird coincidence too is that my dad was sitting in the spare room of the house that has a good view of the front porch. He usually doesn't sit in that room, and if he hadn't decided to have sit in that room on that day, he might not have saw me being approached by our creepy neighbor the way that he did. I firmly believe that there are many unexplainable things in this world. You know, the things we have hard times discussing with others about because you don't want to be labeled as crazy, but you know that they're there all the same. My dad's house, I believe, contains such an entity. There really isn't one big story to tell, but rather a bunch of small ones that combine into something really hard to write off as just sheer coincidence. Most of these are told from my dad's perspective, although I was able to experience one for myself. So I was spending the night at Dad's house one time, and we were all in the living room just watching TV. My little sister was on the couch with my dad and my stepmom, and I was sitting in the recliner with one of my dogs. The other dog was laying in front of the couch. In between the couch and the recliner was an end table, and sitting on the table was a glass box that my stepmom got from her mum. We were paying it no mind when suddenly we just heard a crash. We weren't expecting it, so we all jumped, and the glass box on the table had fallen off the back side of the table and had broken. Now, the glass box had been sitting a good distance away from the edge, so it couldn't have fallen off on its own. No one was close enough to bump the table, and it was honestly like someone just lightly pushed the box off the edge, like kind of what a cat would do or something. Well, we investigated for several minutes before chalking it up to just another one of those incidences. My dad was standing in the middle of the living room watching the TV. It was in the middle of the day at this point, and he was the only one home. When suddenly, from the direction of his and my stepmom's bedroom, he heard a loud and deep ha-ha, and his first thought was that someone had actually broken into his house. So he ran in there, ready to beat the daylights out of the intruder, only to find an empty room. He looked around for a while, and he never found anyone in there, and it was a weird one. Another time, my dad was in the living room again. It was just him and the dogs, and he got up to grab the remote, and he made a comment. You know the kind that you make when you think out loud? Well, then he heard someone hiss silence in his ear. And my dad, the king of underreactions, simply grabbed the remote and, on his way back to the chair, said, "How about you shut the fuck up?" And he didn't hear anything else the rest of the day. One night, my dad and my stepmom had just gotten into bed. I mean that they had just pulled the sheets over them, and the door that leads to the bathroom shook. I'm not talking about some sort of mild shaking that may come with an old house. I mean it was like someone took hold of the door itself and was violently trying to shake it off its hinges. Needless to say, my stepmom was glad that my dad wasn't working nights that night. Along with these things, there are some shadow people sightings made by both my dad and my little sister as well. One time, the middle of the day again, my dad was in the kitchen watching one of his football shows. Something compelled him to look toward the entrance of the kitchen, and he says that he saw shadowy disembodied feet walk across the entrance. My dad, once again, the king of underreactions, looked out the kitchen, and when he saw nothing, he just shrugged his shoulders and went back to his football. This sighting is something that both my dad and little sister swore up and down to that they both saw. On the right back corner of the living room, there's a very short hallway with 3 doors and a door to the bathroom, a door to my room, and a door that used to be my sister's room but is now used for storage. The 2 bedroom doors are on the right side with the bathroom door right in front of them. You can actually see the bedroom rooms from the living room, and they said that they saw a shadow figure leave the bathroom and head into the storage room. That being said, the storage room seems to be where this thing dwells when it isn't bothering my family. It's to the point that my sister refuses to ever even go near that room again, and even just walking past it is enough to cause your hairs to stand on end. I could go on for hours about all the little things that happen, but I'm going to stop here for now. If any of you guys have any idea of what we're dealing with, I would love to know. This happened years ago, but still haunts me to this day. Back when I was in middle school, I lived next door to a small neighborhood. All I had to do was hop the fence and I'd be in the neighborhood where all my friends lived. We were all between the ages of 12 to 13, and there were 5 of us. Well, one of the houses we were always at had a backyard on the edge of the woods, and we had created trails throughout it, complete with bridges over the creek that led to a reservoir of sorts where all the rainwater went, as well as the water that drained from the sewers. I say sewers, but it's just runoff from the streets, and we used the tunnels under the road during intense games of manhunt. Anyway, we called the place the Wall. The wall backed up quite literally to a house in the neighborhood and the next street over, and we could clearly see houses through the trees in any direction that we looked, so it's not like we were ever really far. Besides the trail that we took as well, there was a main exit along the fence to that house aforementioned that led straight into the heart of the neighborhood. Now, the wall was right by the next street over. On our side, where the wall sat, there were 3 houses. In one of those houses lived a well-known police officer whose kids we were friends with. The opposite side had one massive farmland to the left and a heavily wooded area to the right, complete with its own empty, boarded-up, creepy house that couldn't be seen from the road unless it was winter. No one had lived there or even been there for years at this point. So, like I said, and I'm trying to paint a picture here so you can understand, we were very, very close to other homes, which makes this story just an odd one. One day, my friend and I, just the 2 of us girls, decided to go to the wall. Taking the familiar trails through the woods, we made it to the wall. Weeks prior to this, the group of us had been trying to make a bridge so that we can continue our work. Between picking up branches and heavy stones, we noticed something coming from the woods across the street. It was a man, and this man was dressed head to toe in camouflage. Typical hunting gear that I've seen before, but the weird thing was that he had a shotgun in his hand, in a residential area. Luckily, we noticed him before he did us, and I'm so glad that we did, because when he noticed us, his eyes locked on both of us, and his pace began to quicken, and he made a beeline straight at us. He never said a word or even lowered his weapon. It was just in his hands, ready at any given moment. But we snap out of it, and we take the exit, sprinting into the heart of the neighborhood, running straight to my friend's house to tell somebody. We tell her dad immediately, and he goes to check it out, only to find no one there, not even a trace. I don't know where or how that man was out of sight so quickly, but her dad wasted no time and was down there in seconds. The wooded area where the man came from was not large by any means, at least not large enough to ever consider hunting on, and it definitely was not hunting land or anything. It's an extremely residential area, along with an elementary school that we used to walk to in less than 5 minutes. I mean, no lie, the school was right there. So I just never understood why the man was out there in the first place, especially since there was a cop who lived right next door to where we were. So my grandfather owns a cabin near Lincoln, Montana that I went to many times as a child and teenager. It always just had a very strange and uneasy feeling to it as well. There's a large boulder about 12 feet tall with a flat top that I would climb. And one day, when I was standing on the top of it, I felt someone shove me from behind. I fell to the ground and got the wind knocked out of me. My mother was watching the whole thing and asked why I jumped. Because there was nobody behind me. A few years later, I was staying at the cabin with our friends, and the 2 of us decided to go to bed early. That's all I really remember, but this is what the 2 that stayed outside by the fire said happened. So apparently, both of us woke up an hour later in the cabin and just started screaming at them to let us out. Apparently, I pounded on the door and screamed at them to unlock it. They started freaking out as well because there isn't a lock on the door and they didn't understand what the hell was going on. And when they finally opened the door, they found us both just sound asleep. Another time when we got there was a deer carcass just curled up in the fire pit, but that might not even be paranormal. I mean, other small dead animals seem to be a pretty common thing around there. And that's about it, really. We haven't been up there for years, as I live in a different part of the country now, and I don't know if this is a particularly interesting story, but I figured that I should share my experiences anyway, because they're weird, and I don't know. I'm wondering if you guys have any idea as to what's going on there. So, I'm a mail carrier, and I know, super interesting, right? Honestly, though, you'd be surprised at the amount of weird stuff that happens to us. I've had people follow me while I'm delivering and try to get into my delivery vehicle to steal stuff. I've had a customer vomit on my car after she opened a parcel her husband sent her that was supposed to go to his mistress. I've delivered dildos that fell out of their flimsy packaging, dragon dildos no less as well. I've seen people having sex near my more secluded boxes, and they didn't stop for me. And this is the kind of stuff that typically happens to us contract carriers. For those of you who don't know, contract carriers are mail carriers who buy a contract for a mail route that is typically in a rural area that, from what I understand, the fancy mail jeeps cannot traverse. So we use our own vehicles to deliver the mail, and we're paid monthly based on what type of route, how long the route takes on a day-to-day basis, and what the post office deems as fair. Technically, we're self-employed, but still have to abide by the rules of the post office, and we still have to become certified to even touch the mail. But of course, being in the areas that we're in most of the time, that kind of weird stuff I mentioned above happens all the time. Those things happened to me when I was a sub, as someone who works for a contract holder but does not own the route in any way. I was basically paid by the person who owns the route out of their own pocket. But now, however, I'm the somewhat disgruntled owner of a 10-year route contract for the first time. I've owned the contract for about 7 months now, I think, and it's a pretty easy gig. The route itself takes about 2.5 hours to case, sort the email for delivery, and another good 3 to 4 hours to deliver on a good day, 5 to 6 on a super heavy day. I'm really not looking forward to how the holidays fare on this route as well. But anyway, the thing is that before I got the contract, I had no idea what I was bidding on. The way someone gets a contract is that they bid for it. The person bidding will give a monthly salary amount that they feel would be a fairish thing for the route in question. The post office and the bid holders then decide which amount is the most accurate, in their oh-so-wise opinion, for the route, and they give it to whoever has that amount. And I was lucky enough to get it. And so I get a pretty damn good pay that I technically chose for myself. All I knew of the route, though, was that it went down into this valley. I live in a very small desert city with some very wide, outlying mini-communities. These outlying areas are where the majority of our office's contract routes deliver to. My route goes 25 miles out of town to a lot of small ranching properties in the closer areas and to some, well, pretty scattered random loner properties in the farthest areas. There are a lot of hills and dirt roads where I go, and it's very easy to get lost out there if you don't know where you're going. There's one area in particular, though, that goes through a small forest nestled between a random outcropping of hills, heading out onto the state highway. It's not like an evergreen forest or anything. That's just the closest definition I can give. They're not really trees so much as just kind of gigantic bushes that nestle together very closely on either side of the road. That is towards the end of the route, though, but it takes up a good chunk of my customers' addresses. So, when I was training, my previous owner of the route, I'll call him Jim, gave me a rundown of the people who live on the route. There are a lot of ranch owners, of course, and they're the ones who get the most parcels. This isn't really that surprising to me, since they're the richest people out there, and we of course call that section the ranchers. There are the elderly retirees that live at a tiny retirement community set up by the city just outside there. It's pretty spread out, like a teeny little town sort of their own. That's the area where the second most amount of parcels, lots of random buying and sometimes gifts from relatives and whatnot. And we call that area the retirement homes. These are the customers that I talk to the most. They're the outskirters, as Jim called them. And these are the people who live so far off the grid that most of the time we don't really deliver packages to them. As a general rule, we're not allowed to deliver boxes to a house if it's more than 3 miles from the mailbox. Most of them live about 5 or 6 miles from the boxes. Their boxes are in long lines, or clusters as we call them, on the side of the road. As a courtesy to these customers, though, I ask them to give me their phone number so I can call them if they have a parcel and they meet me at the box. Most of them don't mind, and I'm grateful to them, because a lot of those roads are pretty treacherous. I once tried to be nice and deliver a box to one of them, and I actually got stuck, unable to move my car for almost 4 hours as I lost service. Eventually they found me, and that's when they gave me their number at last, and they don't get many boxes, though, in that part of that route. But then there's what Jim called the ghost town. It's not really a town per se, but more of the secluded homes like the previous area. But these guys are closer to the road, and they're the ones who live in the forest that I mentioned above. He called it the ghost town for a good reason as well, because these people are either never home, as most of them are snowbirds, or the ones who are really creepy. And there's a few homes out there that are usually vacant, more snowbirds that just have a lot going on. But for the stories I'm about to tell you, there are 3 homes involved. 2 of them are in the ghost town, and the other one takes place in the outskirts area. But that last one is by far the worst, so I'll leave that to the end. There's more, obviously, but these are by far the most interesting as far as history and the stuff that's happened. I'm telling them in order of intensity, so stick with me. I'll give each house a name here as well, since I pretty much do at work anyway. It's kind of how I remember their addresses without really having to think about it. Real names have obviously been changed for customers' privacy, though. So, the Bailey cluster is a grouping of homes in the ghost town that belongs to a single family with the name of Bailey. The mailboxes are all nestled together on the side of the road against some of those large bushes in the forest that I mentioned. Just before the mailboxes, there are 4 total, is a small dirt road that leads up to their property. The whole road has to be about 4 feet across, I'd say. That's how it feels anyway, because when you're driving up, the bushes on either side will scrape the side of my car. I've gotten more than a few scratches because of them as well. I've asked them to trim them down, but they just never do. So in the end, I just gave up. When you get to the property, though, you're met with this large 6-foot-tall rusted iron gate with the name Bailey fashioned out of bent horseshoes and pipes, kind of welded to the top of it. As a general rule, if a gate is shut, we are never encouraged to try and open it to drive in as well. We aren't really supposed to walk in if it's shut either, unless the customer has told us that it's okay. For the Baileys, I get out, I walk their parcels through the gate and up to the first house, which isn't far from the gate. Now, I have to state that I've never once met these people in person. I've spoken to them on the phone and I've been on their property, but I have never once seen hide nor hair of any one of them. There are a total of 10 people at the address, and their mail is split up as their homes are in like a trailer park of sorts. For example, one of them gets their mail at one Ghost Town Road, another one gets it at State 8, and the other will get it at Mobile 2 or 3 or 4. But there are 4 people in 1 and 2, and 1 person in 3, and the others are all in 4. Every time I bring them a parcel as well, I always just leave it at the first house. Once you walk through their gate as well, you have to walk up a bit of a hill. You can see the total green roof of the first house peeking up over the hill as you walk as well, and when you get closer, it becomes apparent very quickly why the place is just so unsettling. Clowns. These people, they love clowns. There are clown statues, paintings, mobiles, wind chimes, I mean, you name it. It's just clown face everywhere. They even have clown dolls scattered around the place, and none of them look nice. They're all kind of threadbare and worn out from sitting in the hot desert sun all the time, and I'm pretty sure animals have made homes in some of them as well. There are actually a few that are even big enough to house a small family of squirrels. Now, I know that this isn't paranormal or even all that creepy, but you have to admit that it's more than a little odd, right? The first house is a simple single wide mobile with a bright teal green painted roof, and the windows all have clown decals in them. Little clown faces that, honestly, look like they're straight out of a vintage colouring book, hand-coloured and everything. At one end of the place is the porch. It's not too big, just about 6 or 7 feet. There's a small awning with dozens of clown wind chimes and sun catchers hanging from it, almost making a curtain out of them, they're so clustered together. On the porch is a rocking chair, and this thing is painted like a clown. The curved rockers are painted red, the legs that attach them to the chair are yellow with red polka dots, the seat and arms are white, and the back is white with 3 big red dots painted on it, like puffballs on a clown shirt. The top part of the back has a clown face on it, and you put it all together, and I'm telling you, it's a nightmare. The reason why I mention this chair as well is because it's where I'm asked to leave the parcels, and I always do, but I'll never forget the first time that I left them there. There were 4 boxes for them, and one for 1 and the rest for 3, and I called ahead of time to let them know that I'd be out there in about 3 hours, since they're towards the end of the route. It takes longer to get to them, in other words. I'm always told as well by who I assume is their matriarch or something, to leave them all on that damn chair. I've never been up to their property at this point, and I'd been delivering about a month, but only ever had mail and small parcels that fit in the box for them. So when I went up there for the first time, seeing their little clown cluster was a bit nerve-wracking for sure. I mean, I'm terrified of clowns, and I have been since I was a kid, but that's a story for another time as to why. But I crept up to that first house and I peered around the place. It's so isolated and odd that I felt like every single clown around me was just watching me. I placed the boxes on the chair in a neat little pile, and I settled the chair to stop it from rocking so the boxes wouldn't fall off. Once it was still, I turned and I hastily tried to leave, but it was the creaking that stopped me. I froze and I listened, knowing full well what it was. I turned and, sure as shit, that chair was rocking. And not just a little bit, but enough to knock one of the boxes onto the porch. It was honestly like someone had deliberately pulled it all the way back and thrust it forward to rock as violently as possible. And you can bet your bottom dollar that I didn't hesitate one bit. I just ran and I noped the hell out of there, and I was not staying after that. Another time I had a parcel for them. I almost wrote it up out of protest, but I called and again was asked to leave it on the chair. And this is the time that I noticed that it felt like no one was actually there. What I mean is that I'd been there a dozen times by then, and I remember standing at the top of the hill by the gate just peering around me like, where is everyone? According to their mail, there should be at least a few children that live there, and when I was there that day, it was the middle of summer, and why weren't the kids home, playing outside or something? And why didn't I ever see anyone there? The second and the third houses are a bit far away from the first house. It'd be about a 5-minute walk, I think, to get to them, but you can see them pretty well. And the curtains are always open, but I just never see anyone inside. The fourth house is the farthest away at the top of a small hill, and they have a big picture window facing the gate. It too always has the curtains open, but again, I just never see anyone there. But the weirdest of all, definitely, is that their vehicles are just always there, but they never move. There are 2 trucks, an SUV, all relatively newish as well. The oldest, I think, was a 2012 model, and an old station wagon, and the wagon looks pretty run down, but the others look like they've been pretty much taken care of, always clean at least. But anyway, at this other time I had a parcel and I noticed no one is ever around, and so I got curious and I phoned the woman I always do when bringing parcels. I'd figured that I'd just tell her that I was making sure someone would be back soon to get the parcel, as there's a lot of theft out there. This isn't a lie as well, because there usually is on more secluded routes. You'd actually probably be pretty surprised at just how much more common it is out there than in the city. I heard a phone ringing in the first house beside me. If I'm on the porch, I can peek into the window just behind the evil rocking chair, and it was close. The phone that was ringing, I mean. And I wanted to see someone pick it up, so I squeezed myself between the chair and looked in. I'd never looked inside before. More clowns, of course, and some clown-themed throws on the couch and the pillows too. And on a side table, clearly visible from the window, I could see the cell phone lit up with mail lady on the caller ID. No one ever answered. But when I left, she called me back, and I'd been gone for about a good 5 minutes, I'd say, when she did. I just told her that I wanted to be sure that someone was home, and she said that someone is always here. According to Jim, though, he never saw anyone there either. The third and the final most interesting thing to ever happen at the Bailey cluster was just last month, actually. I got a very large box for them, one I needed a dolly for, in fact, and I called before I left the post office to let them know, and the lady I always speak to told me that she would have her oldest son help me. I thought to myself, finally I'll get to meet one of them. This ought to be good, right? Well, I get there, and it's my last package, and then I was free to breeze through the final 50 or so boxes I have after them. I have a total of about 670 boxes on my route, by the way, and I go to the back, pull out the dolly, slide the box out onto it, and start dragging it up to the gate. I look around, and there's no one to meet me, of course. The lady told me, though, that he'd be waiting for me on the porch of the first house, and when he saw me, he'd come down to help. You can see the gate from the porch pretty well, but I can never really see my car from it. So I honked just in case he couldn't see me either, but no one came down. I waited for about 5 minutes before saying, screw it, I'm just going to take it up. And boy, did I struggle up that hill with it. I don't know what was in that box, but I'm pretty sure it weighed at least 75 pounds. The post office has a 70-pound weight limit that a lot of companies try to stretch up to about 75 to 80. Usually they go to UPS, but sometimes they slip through the cracks and they come to us. But anyway, I get to the first house, and of course there's nobody there. I look around, and as usual, I'm alone with a bunch of clown dolls just gaping at me. I wiggle the box up on the stairs on the dolly, and I lean it against the railing next to the rocking chair. It's way too big to sit on it, and so I just head down to my car. And that was when I hear "thank you" from behind me. It's a man's voice, and I assumed it was the son who was supposed to help me. I quickly run back up the hill, and not only is there no one there, but that box is gone from the porch. This was in the span of about 10 seconds as well, and I wasn't even down the hill all the way. It doesn't take that long to walk back down, but I looked in the window and everything, and I just didn't see a soul. I really do hate going to the Bailey cluster, and I end up going there a lot these days. So, the second house, this place is the one that gives me the most creeps. While I was training too, Jim told me about this place. This is another snowbird place where the people only live there between October and March. They were there when I started, and they actually came back at the beginning of this month. Super nice people as well, and I actually really like them, but I don't have a clue as to why they live there. Jim told me that back in the early 90s, when he first started working at the post office, the guy who used to do the route before him told him the story. According to him, there was a family of 5 that lived there, and all of them were absolutely crazy. The mum had schizophrenia and would apparently abuse the kids because of the voices. The father was no better. He was a worthless drunk who just sat by while his crazy wife heard the kids. And one night, the eldest child, who was 18 and finally fed up with how they were raised, tried to escape with his siblings. But the mother, of course, tried to stop them, and the kid just finally snapped. And he murdered his parents and painted the walls with their blood. The incident changed him, and while his siblings escaped, he apparently stayed in the house with his parents' corpses until he ended up slitting his own throat and tried painting the floor with his own blood before succumbing to blood loss and dying himself. And they weren't found for months. The place was eventually cleared out and torn down and rebuilt, and the guy who built the new house was compelled to paint the house red. It's not obnoxiously red or anything, but it's just too red, if that makes sense. There's no long driveway up to this place. It sits right on the road at the end of the ghost town. The end is literally just a dead-end road, and they're right there at the tail end of it, where signs tell you to just turn around. The current owners, we'll call them Mr. and Mrs. Nice, because they're nice and I'm not all that creative at the moment, have told me countless horror stories about living there, though. And to be honest with you guys, I sometimes think that they get some sort of a sick thrill out of it or something. When they're not there, though, I just forward everything, but I have to pass their house to get to the turnaround spot, and the neighbours always have mail, so I go by them pretty much no matter what. And let me tell you that I've seen some just really weird shit out there. But every time I pass the blood house, I just get this awful feeling of dread. What I mean by this is that whenever I did delivery packages to them, I'd step out of the car, and just standing at the edge of the driveway honestly feels like standing at the precipice of a cliff. I feel like stepping onto their property is like jumping off to my death or something. It's terribly unsettling, and I honestly don't know how they stay there for as long as they do. I mean, they live there for 6 months out of the year, so I guess for them it might not be too bad, but if I feel that way just delivering packages once in a while, I don't know. It just doesn't make much sense to me. But anyway, Mrs. Nice told me one day to always watch the third window from the left, because apparently that's where the son who went mad likes to sit. She calls him Tommy, even though that wasn't his real name. She feels it suits him though, and she talks about him like he's her own son or something. I think that she pities him, and she believes his soul is trapped there because of all the horrible things that happened to him. When she first told me, my reaction was just, no thanks. But one day, the temptation just got the best of me, and I looked. When you're at the mailbox, you can see into all their windows, and their house is a long one-story place with 6 windows, 3 on either side of the small front door. Of course, the house is red like I mentioned, but the trim and the door are all white, and the window in question is the one that sits right next to the front door on the left. Mrs. Nice told me that that's the front guest room, and so I looked, and I could barely believe my eyes, because I didn't see a full-bodied apparition or anything like that, but I definitely saw a face, and it looked just so anguished. Like, you know the happy and the sad mask that you see for drama and theatre? It looked like the sad mask, just pain. But I blinked, and the face was suddenly gone, and the curtain, which was open, was now closed. Another time, I actually walked up to the house to put a package by the door. The Nices weren't home that day. Their truck was gone, so I decided that I would put the package around the back and leave a note in their box to let them know, since I didn't have a number for them at the time. When I walked around the back, I put the package over the small fence into their backyard. And once I did, I turned and I felt myself just run into someone. But there wasn't anything in front of me. Nothing but air, that is. But I swear that I felt something was in front of me. I didn't want to move forward. It was like an invisible wall had just been erected before me, and while I couldn't see it, I knew that if I went any further, that I was probably going to get hurt. It just felt really oppressive and strange, and I actually backed up into the house and slid along the wall all the way to the front, and whatever invisible force was there, I felt like it followed me. And I'm ashamed to admit it, but I actually began to cry because I felt like there was a person just pressing up against me as I was moving, like they were trying to force me back. Once I hit the edge of the house, too, I just bolted and I ran to my car and I just sped away. I cried most of the way back as well because it was just so, I don't know what else to say, but terrifying. When I told Mrs. Nice about it the next time I saw her too, she said that Tommy likes to do that. He tries to intimidate people, and he does it to Mr. Nice all the time apparently. Around the 3rd week too, after the Nices left for their summer home, I passed the house and I swear that I saw someone standing at the mailbox, but it just wasn't solid, if that's the right word. It was like a blurred outline of a person when I got closer, and as I passed, the head seemed to turn with me as I drove by, just sort of watching me. I don't like passing that house, and I'm glad they're back for the winter because it makes me feel a bit more at ease to know that they're there. But I still don't like the idea of delivering packages to them at all. I do not want to be anywhere near Tommy. But now for the last one, which, of course, I saved the worst for last. So the third house I call the Hills Have Eyes house, and I hate this house. This is the one that isn't in the ghost town. This is in the section before it, the outskirts. These are the homes that are so scattered that we usually don't bring parcels out for them because they're just so far away. But this house is an exception because it's less than a mile from the cluster of boxes that they get their mail at. And these people are never home from what I can understand. Jim told me to never call them too because they're apparently very rude and very hostile. He instructed me to just go to their gate if they have a parcel, always bring the mail with it or they'll call and complain, leave the parcel in the basket that hangs on their fence with their mail in a rubber band, and then just turn around and leave. He said to never linger there as well, and he told me that if I did, they would definitely get hostile. And so I just do as I'm told, but thankfully they've almost never been home while I've been there. But I'll tell you right now that there's something there, and I know that sounds so cheesy, but it's true. I don't know the history of the place itself, but just that these people are apparently the world's biggest pricks. 2 men live there or something, brothers from what Jim has told me. They run a small chicken farm and bring their eggs to the feed store in town to sell them at the time. It's not uncommon to see their chickens roaming around on the road leading up to the house. The road itself is barely a road, if I'm being honest. It's more like a bumpy little walking trail, but it's the only way to get there, and I know I've said it already, but man, I hate going there. I call it the Hills Have Eyes house because it's settled between 2 large hills, and from far away, the hills look like eyes, and the house honestly looks like a mouth. That, and the way this place looks, it looks like something just out of the movie, The Hills Have Eyes. There's butchering equipment everywhere, bloody knives and cleavers and chains and hooks, and they've got cows too, but I think they keep the meat for themselves. The smell is just atrocious too, and it always just smells like death. It wouldn't shock me at all too if these guys committed murder out there and only butchered cows when they did it to make excuses for the stench of death, because it's that bad. And every single time I go out there, something always happens. I've been out there 6 times to deliver parcels, so I'll recount each incident. So the first time I was out there was about 3 months after I started delivering. I did as I was told, and I wrapped the mail in a rubber band, and I headed out to the house. It takes a good 3 or 4 minutes for me to get there. It's around a bend, and then that's when you see the other 2 hills that the house sits between. The main house has a fence around it with a gate, but the whole property has an outer fence with no gate that you can go through. But once you're up against the gate, the whole place just looks smaller than it actually is because it's just full of junk. It's full of the butchering stuff and random metal sculptures and a bunch of worn-out furniture, garbage, a few skulls here and there, and then the house itself. The house is just a small trailer that's been cemented into the ground, so it's no longer mobile. A makeshift ramp or a porch thing sits against the door and leads to a side gate, and this is where the basket for the packages is. All around this gated area are coops and other fenced areas for the animals as well, and it's smelly and weird and just creepy around there. So I just toss the box and the mail into the basket and I turn to leave. And after seeing this place for the first time, I definitely did not want to stay at all. When I got to my car, I looked in my rearview mirror though, and I swear that I saw a man standing behind my car. But when I perked my head out to ask him to move, there was nobody there. And of course, after that, I didn't stay for 1 more second. The second incident was much closer to the evening. It was another super heavy day, and I did not want to go out there. But as I was approaching, I saw someone standing at the window of the house. I assumed that it was one of them trying to see who was coming. I have car magnets on my car that all say USPS on them, so people know who I am. I figured that he'd seen them and be more at ease knowing a package was coming and not some random weirdo. But as I approached, the figure in the window seemed to kind of distort and just eventually vanish entirely. When I saw this, I did not want to get out of the car. I just wanted to stay there and toss the parcel and the mail out the window. After working up the courage, though, I sped from the car to the basket and back, and I went to leave. But as I was getting into the car, I heard this really loud laughter, and it sounded like it was right next to my car, like someone was standing beside me and just went, ha ha. And after that, I prayed that I wouldn't have to come back for a while. But 2 months later, I had to go back with 4 big boxes for them. This time it was a pretty light day, and I was breezing through delivery pretty quickly, so I was happy about that. They're about in the middle of the route, so they're like a halfway point to me, and I went to the house and was greeted by a large bull in the yard. I'm not usually nervous around animals, but a bull isn't someone you want to mess around with, right? He was standing just a few feet away from the fence with the basket, so I just patiently waited to see if he'd move. I didn't want to honk, lest the angry bastards who lived there just happened to be home and come out to yell at me or something. I didn't want to shoo him because, honestly, I didn't think it would work. When all of a sudden, this bull moves and freaks the hell out, thrashing about like someone was riding him. He came dangerously close to my car as well before running off into the area where the fences are. And then a whole chorus of moos erupted from that area, and it was just a cacophony of noise. I grabbed the boxes and I got them to the fence as fast as I could. I didn't know what spooked the bull, and I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. I didn't see anything this time, but I was afraid of the bull coming back and tearing up my car or even goring me in the process. Now, the 4th incident is honestly not the worst, but still pretty unsettling. So, I never had a package so small that it actually fit in a box for them. And honestly, I almost said screw it and just shoved it in the mailbox. I should have, but I didn't want them to call and complain. They hadn't complained on me so far, so I wanted to keep it that way. So I reluctantly headed to the house again with the package and their mail, and when I got there was a single dead chicken hanging from the awning above the porch. It was weird, but given this place's track record, it honestly wasn't that surprising. And definitely not as surprising as the giant dressed cow hanging from the pole on the other side of the yard. I didn't notice that until I was putting the package in the basket. It was obscured by a tree when driving up the place, and as I'm walking back to the car, the chicken and the cow both started to just suddenly swing. Now, it's not windy, and even if it was, one of these things is a cow. I didn't think a light breeze was going to push a cow, but they're swinging back and forth almost in tandem, and at this point, I just said nope, and I left because I wasn't about to stay for the rest of that show. The 5th time was 2 weeks ago, and it had been quiet for a while since I was out there, and I had vainly hoped that I wouldn't have to go back for longer, but I will. The holidays are starting, and everyone's getting their stuff, so it makes sense. So I get out there with 3 boxes, and for the first time, I see a living, breathing person in the window. Jim told me that one of the brothers was in a wheelchair. This was apparently that brother. He was bald, with a weird tribal tattoo across where I believe his hairline used to be, just sitting in the window, just staring at me. I waved out of courtesy, and of course he didn't wave back. The first time either of us had ever laid eyes on one another, but I don't know what I expected him to do. Maybe smile back and wave or something, but I guess I know damn well that these guys are pretty much dicks. I noticed as I put the parcel in the basket, though, that he wasn't looking at me, but something behind me. And I looked, and I saw someone walk up behind one of the chicken coops. I looked back at the brother in the window, and he gave me a sort of grumpy, you saw that right, kind of look, and nodded toward the coop. I just kind of slowly nodded and went back to the car, and he watched me back out, and as I was turning back onto the road, I saw him leave the window and draw the curtain closed. The last time was actually yesterday, and thus far it's definitely the freakiest thing next to the bull. So, I was having a typical holiday season Monday, very heavy day with lots of mail and lots of parcels and whatnot. And of course, they had to have a whopping 5 parcels delivered to them. So I get out there at about 4 p.m. or so, and I'm already exhausted, halfway done, knowing I'm not going to go home until about 7. It takes a good 45 minutes to get back to the post office, and another 10 to unload and finish my day. I know I won't be finishing the route until about 6 or so I'm just trying to hurry everything along. Going out to this place too doesn't help in making good time, so I get out and put some of the boxes in the basket and the others below it, and I go to leave. When suddenly, I feel a hard tug on my shirt that pulls me back, and I fall on my ass in the dirt. I hit my head on the edge of the trailer and swear to myself before getting up. I thought maybe I just caught my shirt on something, but as I get further away, I feel another tug and fall back again. And this time, I know I didn't catch on anything because I was about 2 feet away from the fence on my left, and there was nothing on my right, and nothing directly behind me either. And at this, I scramble up and try to run and pull hard as I feel another tug and I hear that god-awful laugh again. Once I broke free from whatever this thing was that was holding me, I didn't look back and I just ran for my vehicle and I left. I still talk to Jim every now and then about this stuff, and when I tell him about these incidents, he goes, "Oh yeah, that place is haunted, more so than some of the others, I think." But in Jim's opinion, the whole route is pretty much damned. There are, as I said, other places out there where weird stuff happens as well, but these are by far the ones that I found the creepiest. After yesterday's little incident at the Hills Have Eyes house, I felt like I wanted to share these stories with someone other than my husband as well. But either way, I'm obviously in a contract now, so if this is the best of the last 7 months, I'm sure that I'll have way more after these 10 years are over. Thanks for listening if you got this far. I know it's pretty long, but I had to get some of this stuff off my chest because it's just eating away at me.